Okay, hi everybody, thanks. Welcome to our next episode of Translational Research Ethics Applied Topics. I'm Peter Schwartz. I'm the director of the Center for Bioethics and of the Bioethics and Subject Advocacy Program of the Indiana CTSI. And this is a speaker series, a series we've done for a bunch of years now to give a short introduction to ethics issues in research that are coming up in translational research, especially the focus of the Indiana CTSI. And the goal is to give a short introduction. As you know, this is painful to me. Speaking for a short period of time goes against everything I stand for, but I will try to do it. It's a 30 minutes is our goal, maybe even less. And then conversation, discussion for about 30 minutes. And the goal of these talks is to give people a quick introduction to the topic so that they can come to us for more information and they can actually see it, the talk, not just today with all of you here, which is wonderful to have you, but also we archive these things online. In fact, let's see if this works. I'm gonna try to, oh, it's gonna let me, look at this, great. So here is our online archive of these talks, the Translational Research Ethics Topics Talks, the TREATS Talks. This is on the Center for Bioethics website. You can also get there through the CTSI website. And here you go. You can see the most recent talks going back in time. This is from recent to PAC, or you can see it as an A to Z listing by topic. It goes from advocacy or authorship, a great talk by Jane recently, Professor Hartsock, I should say, all the way down to wearable technology. And this one really should be called quality improvement. Should be in the queues, but it's down here for some reason. We also have recently, again, when you go to these pages, take authorship, for instance, you can see the talk. You can get a little short introduction to it. There's a video. This one has a picture at the very beginning of it, and then references to go and find out more about the topic if you want. So that is our goal. And we now actually have just added onto the TREATS talk a core section. So you can go and see core topics. If you just want a general introduction to core topics in research ethics and responsible cognitive research, you can go through here. And actually, this is one that I've done before. We've lost the video for the time I did it before, and we decided to redo it. So we have an updated version on this topic. This topic's been coming up a lot, I should say. We'll go back to the first page, paying research participants. I hear about it on national meetings I go to. I hear about it as an ethics issue that a lot of programs face. It seems to be a central topic. And here at IU, there's actually a group led by Brenda Hudson through the CTSI. I believe John's involved in that group. I know I saw Mary Ott on the phone, and she's involved in that group too, on this topic. And I actually saw their draft document, and it stimulated me to want to do this talk. So I hope this is helpful. And like I said, speaking quickly is second nature. Speaking for a short period of time is against everything I stand for. Our goal with these talks is to give a short introduction if you're watching this online, and then you can call us for a consultation or for go to one of our classes. So I'm going to start with I'm going to start by revving my engine. I'm sitting here on a motorcycle. I thought I'd do that first. Okay, that was the FedEx truck. So here you go. So I'm going to focus on one part of this, and it has to do with the ideas of coercion and undue influence. And this is something actually some very smart ethicists, much smarter than myself, have been writing about. And I am smart enough to understand what they're saying and to convey it to you guys. And I hope to the world of research that basically we have been misthinking, and I believe in some cases completely misunderstanding, ideas of coercion and undue influence as they apply to research ethics. Actually, I'm not going to accuse the IRB of this. I think our IRB is excellent at this topic. I've had conversations with them, the leadership there. But I think some researchers actually are confused. They hear the word coercion, they hear the word undue influence, and they run. And this is a topic, therefore, that a philosopher like myself, a jointly trained philosopher with medicine person, can maybe help with. So the take-home point is we may be worrying about overpaying research participants due to this general idea of interfering with voluntariness. And I think we should worry less about it. We still have to worry, of course, but I think there's been a misplaced emphasis. Again, I'm following some very good ethicists on this, which I'll explain more about. And we have to think more about the dangers of underpaying research subjects and participants, which I would call exploitation. Again, these are all philosophically loaded terms, and I'm going to go through each of them. And so it's a perfect topic for me. I put here, right, a philosopher wants to let you know, like, should I cut these? The joke there is that when I was in surgery as a medical student, when you were on your surgery rotation, you always ask the surgeon, do you want these sutures cut too long or too short? Because they were never right. If you cut them one way, it was too long. Cut it shorter, it's too short. And I think with paying of research subjects, we may get in the same mindset where we may be paying them too much or too little. And I want to think about how to approach that. As I said, as a philosopher, I'd like to walk you through some of these notions which float around, but which philosophers and ethicists have been thinking about very carefully. And we hope to help you think about it in a practical way. There'll be no simple formula here, but I'm going to be recommending some approaches. Again, my interest here is partly because of the interesting philosophy behind it. I think the questions of what is coercion and what is undue influence in general are fascinating questions. And I think this is a case, though, where we can use these notions to improve research ethics and the responsible conduct of research. I will be following a excellent paper. Mostly, there are a bunch of good papers out there, but the paper I really like is by Emily Largent and Holly Fernandez-Lynch, about paying research participants, a paper that appeared a couple of years ago, actually 2017, in the Hastings Center's Ethics of Research journal. Okay, I'm going to go back to the beginning. The purpose of research. So as you know, and we do informed consent for research participants generally, and we think informed consent is very important. Informed consent is a short picture here of how we think about informed consent for research versus clinical care is that when we talk about risks of participating in research and participating and getting clinical care, describing those risks in the informed consent form is not all that different in the two cases. You have to describe risks that are important, that are significant enough to be material to a reasonable person. And so when I think of consent in both those cases, and I evaluate consent forms, consent discussions, I think description of risk is actually pretty similar. The burden on the researcher and on the clinician, two very different characters, is similar. You have to explain the risks that are relevant to a reasonable person. Benefits, however, could not be more different. In the case of receiving clinical care, you're there to receive help for your health, either to treat an illness, to address perhaps suffering caused by an illness, or to prevent illness or disease. In research, the reason for the interaction, the reason why you're there is to advance science and medicine. There are still ethical obligations, of course, important ones of the researcher towards you, but the goal of their interaction with you and their primary purpose, you could say, is not to improve your health, it is to advance science and medicine. So while it's very clear why a person goes for healthcare, it has always been a puzzle in research ethics, why exactly a person is there. And if they are there for different reasons, which of these reasons are okay? And payment for participation is going to be one of those reasons. And there's been a bit of a confusion and difficulty with the notion of whether it is okay for a person to be there just for the money. Is that okay? So Hans Jonas, one of the great early bioethicists, wrote about the reasons for human subjects to be involved in research. And from his view and the view of similar bioethicists from that time, the goals of the research subject, the reason why they had come in, the benefits to them were really benefits to others. So that's called altruism. It was a gift from the participant to the society, to the future members. And perhaps it was actually engaging in a partnership with the researchers. So the participant is not designing the research, perhaps, is not conducting the research, but they are contributing with a shared goal with the researchers of achieving certain ends. Now, I will say the last part of this has become much more prominent as we think about community-based research, we think about patient-centered research, we think about the partners that we have in our research. So this is not all out of date, but this is how it's thought about first. Now, from this perspective, and I'd say coming up to the modern day, we can separate the reasons for giving money to participants into four categories. Roughly, you could probably do different ones. Here they are. First, you might be reimbursing people for just their expenses of coming and participating in research. So that would be something like, their parking fees. Second, we might be wanting to reimburse them to make them whole. If they were injured in some way, then you might think that we should be reimbursing them with money to help them get better. You those of you who are involved in research know that often we just say, well, your health insurance will cover that if you're injured. But this is a reason for monetary compensation you could think about, even with those old Hans Joseph Jonas categories, right? Somebody comes out of the goodness of their heart, they're participating to help future science, but they get injured. You could imagine, of course, that's part of how you would pay them. And you might just be showing your thankfulness, right? That's another way to say, gee, we really appreciate your coming out here and making the sacrifice for the future of research and the future of knowledge. And we'd like to give you this $100 to say thank you. And there's a very different model, the fourth thing, which is a wage model, where we see the money as being an inducement to participate, where we're giving higher pay, for instance, for higher time commitment, effort, discomfort, and for risk. We're saying we're paying you to do this like we pay people when they are working in other settings. Right, so 1 through 3, we're all consistent with the idea of research participation as a purely altruistic act. Number 4 isn't so much. Number 4 says, no, this is one of the benefits. We were looking for the reason why people participate in research. Here's one we're going to do. We're going to give them money. And I would say the research ethicists, like researchers and other leaders in the research world, have been a bit conflicted about the fourth model. Now, what does the common rule say? The regulation here says that informed consent should be carried out in ways, quote, that minimize the possibility of coercion or undue influence. So here are these notions that have befuddled and somewhat confused us. The regulation says we should be minimizing the possibility of coercion and undue influence. So what does that mean? When does payment cause coercion and undue influence? And how should IRBs or research ethicists, for instance, guiding researchers, or yes, researchers themselves, how should they act in response? So the first question would be, what is coercion? So I do this with a class. I actually asked the students to respond. I'm just going to, in the interest of time, just go through this. Here are the 4 cases, just 4 cases, really off the top of my head. I'm a parent, right? I say to my child, you can't watch TV until you finish your homework. I want you to think about each of these. Are they coercion? Right? Is this coercive when I give my son a statement like that? Ooh, or my wife says to me, when I say, let's just stay home tonight, she says, if you want to stay home, fine. Fine, my brother used to teach me, it's a 4-letter word. I know what she means. She's saying, I'm going to be irritated. If we really are going to hang around the house the way you want to do and work on your papers, that's not going to make me happy. Is that coercion that she's telling me she's going to be irritated? To my employee, I say, if you're late one more time, I'm going to fire you. You will be fired. I have the right to do that, and I will do that. To my contractor, I say, okay, interesting estimate. You're going to clean my gutters for $200. I don't accept that offer. I'll give you $125. Do it for that price, or go to your next house. So are any of these coercion? When I ask students, or actually I once did this before with research coordinators, I think I had some people say that each of these are coercion. I had at least somebody in the audience argue that each of these are coercive, right? They come off maybe seeming a little mean and kind of hard, right? I'm going to argue that these are not coercion. And I'll give you a definition for why that is. These are fair bargaining. You may have noticed my first 2 were familial. You might say, Peter, there's something wrong with you to use familial examples when you're trying to think about coercion. But I think actually the home life, the personal life is, of course, always central to thinking about ethical behavior. And I would call these fair bargaining. Here's what's not fair bargaining. Here is true coercion, robbed at gunpoint. Somebody points a gun at you and says your money or your life in the old-fashioned way. And I say, gee, how old are you? This is when you get robbed by a 65-year-old, right? This is like an old man robbing you, because that's an old saying, your money or your life, right? That is coercion. To an employee, right? This is the same employee case. I say, if you're late one more time, I'll tell the company you've been stealing. You haven't, but I will lie to them. To a contractor, I say, I know I agreed to pay you $125 for the gutties, but I won't pay you for that. If you don't resurface my driveway, I'm not paying you anything. I'm going to renege on my offer. So what's special about those cases is they are coercion by this definition. A coercion is a threat to violate someone else's rights or to fail to satisfy an obligation to someone in order to obtain compliance in situations where that person has no reasonable alternative but to comply. If you go back here, actually, do I do it next? I think I've got some more slides here. Yeah, no, I don't. So let me just go back here. I'm gonna go backwards, right? So look, I'm telling my child, you can't watch TV till you finish homework. I'm not violating any of his rights. I'm not treating him unjustly. I'm just telling him how it is. Because I am the parent, I have that right. My spouse can be irritated at me. She often is. I don't blame her, right? To an employee, if you're late, you don't fulfill your obligations, then there are consequences for that, which are fair and were probably explained to you when you first came to work. Negotiating with a contractor. I have a price I want to pay for this. If you don't want to do it for my price, that's called the free market. What's wrong about being robbed at gunpoint is that what I am threatening to do is to hurt you with the gun. And that is to violate your rights. That is to be unjust towards you. It is to assault you. By the way, I'm realizing it's very quiet, so I hope I have not somehow frozen. I've been talking for 20 minutes on my own. So Aubrey, I can see you. Can you give me some, I can see your dog picture. Can you give me some sign? Yes, good, okay, good, just went off you, fine. Okay, but Aubrey, I'm counting on you to let me know if I go bad. And I've got my phone here too, in case I do go bad. It is kind of lonely when you're talking on Zoom. By the way, I will mention the Treats Talks will be returning to in person in August. So at least the speaker will be in the room, even though we'll still probably allow Zooming. Anyway, and to the contractor, when I lied and said I'd pay him for the gutters, but now I'm demanding more, that's violating my promise to him. And therefore, what I've done is I've failed to satisfy my obligation. So now let's move to research. Back to research, I should say. What if I have a simple survey I'm doing for a study, and it takes 10 minutes to do, and there's no real risk to it, and I'm not offering to pay. I'm just asking people as they walk by on the street to fill it out. It's certainly not coercive if I don't pay them. What if I offer them $5? It's a pretty good money for filling out a survey, but am I violating their rights in some way or failing to fulfill an obligation to them by offering them money? Of course not. What if I gave them $1,000? This is the kind of case I think some researchers think about when they worry about overpaying their subjects. It's not that the research is so risky. It's just a survey. But I'm paying an insane amount. And I think for some people, they think, well, that's sort of too good an offer to refuse. And so what I am doing is that I'm giving them no reasonable alternative but to comply. It's such a good offer, $1,000 for a 5-minute survey. Nobody in their right mind turns that down. So this is somehow coercive because it is very convincing. And the answer is, it is not. Not by this notion of coercion, right? Because although it is true, it's an offer that's too good to refuse. What I'm doing is I'm not violating their rights with that offer. I'm not failing to fulfill an obligation to them. I am truly giving them an offer that's too good to turn down. They can still, though. And if they do turn it down, none of their rights will be violated. They will walk away just as well as they were when they came. Again. Okay, so let's get back to a little more. So now it's a phase 3 randomized trial. Now there's a little bit of risk. Again, no pay. I'm going to say not exploitative, to offer people the chance to participate, to be randomized to, say, 2 different antihypertensive drugs. And they can do it if they want. They don't have to do it if they don't want. I'm willing to give them $50. Right now, that seems like that's something probably wouldn't IRB. No researcher would even wonder about. Again, overpay. Once again, I'm going to argue that overpaying here is not coercive. It is very convincing. It's a bad use of your research money, and the NIH should come to you and say, "You're paying too much. You're not giving the money away. This is ridiculous." But it's not a coercive offer to a research subject because they're participating in a trial that really wouldn't have been unjust to enroll them for no pay. Again, we have not violated someone's rights or failed to satisfy our obligation to them in order to obtain their compliance. Phase 1 trial with some risk, again, no pay, money. Okay, so here's their argument, which again, I am trying to convince you to accept, and I am happy to discuss in our discussion. But the idea is excessive payment. If a lower payment would not be coercive, then excessive payment is not coercive. So what is wrong with overpaying participants? If it's not coercion, you might say, okay, Pete, we get it, not coercive. It's still wrong, and maybe it's going to fall in this category of undue inducement, undue influence. Once again, you can think about that phase 1 trial, right? You're encouraging them to participate in this phase 1 trial. I don't think it would be unethical to enroll them if they offered to do it altruistically. Now you're offering them $1,000. Maybe it's not coercive. What if it had extremely high risks? What if I offered you $1,000 to run across the street with your eyes closed? This is a scene in a movie, it's an Eddie Murphy movie called Bowfinger, one of his lesser known movies. At one point, I forget why he does it, but he closes his eyes and runs across the street. That is a horrible decision to make, whether it works out or not. I use it in my decision-making classes a bit. But it would be, I would say, concerning, maybe ethically questionable. I would say ethically wrong to pay somebody $1,000 to run across the street with their eyes closed. That's interesting. I'm not coercing them, but how do we describe what's going wrong there? What's wrong is that the individual is doing something that has a very high probability of causing harm, or extreme discomfort, which is not worth it, even for the money offered. Again, we can have a long discussion about this. These treats talks are not like a class where we could really delve into this. But the idea is the money is blinding the person to the dangers involved. You aren't coercing them, but you're acting unethically. And this gets the idea of undue influence. It's an offer to provide an excessive reward that results in bad judgment, meaning it results in a choice that's unreasonably against the offeree, the participants' self-defined values and interests. I think in the case of the person running across the street with their eyes closed, you can see how that would be. That, person they wouldn't do it for fun. They wouldn't do it for $100, but they will take this insane risk, which is a horrible risk to take. I gotta tell you, I don't even care how hard up you are for the money. You guys can argue with this in a class. We'd have a great discussion about it, but this is an unethical offer to somebody. And the idea of undue influence is probably closer to what researchers worry about. Now, this phrase, though, an offer to provide an excessive reward that results in bad judgment. So the person accepts it, even though it is not in their self-interest. This does raise some very good and deep questions, which of course we can't solve today. Come to our classes for that, right? What are an individual's self-defined values and interests? I mean, Eddie Murphy in that movie, I can't remember much about the movie. I should re-watch it before I talk about it in talks, I guess. It's, it's part of my research. You might think I sit at home and read books and run my studies, and come to the office occasionally. But actually it's the movies I have to watch to catch up on my references. You can see I don't do that enough though. I can't remember why he does it, but right, how do we know the person who does this crazy thing, either phase 1 trial or run across the street with their eyes closed? What are their self-defined values and interests? I can tell you from a researcher in this area, it's very hard to pin that down. And how do we know if the choice was consistent with those interests? A case that Largen and Lynch go through in that article I quite like is that your next door neighbor, Kate, is friendly with you. There's a big snowstorm. I know it's hard to imagine right now. This is a talk I can only do in the winter time. But there's a snowstorm, and she offers to shovel your walk because she knows that you're feeble, perhaps. And it's certainly a nice thing to do. I wouldn't call it unethical in any way. And let's say I offer her $10 to do it, and she would do it for $10. And again, I overpay her. Same thing. It's not coercive, and it doesn't look like undue influence to overpay her here either. She might do it as a favor. But now imagine Kate has a heart condition that makes it extremely difficult and dangerous for her to shovel your walk. Now it's going to look more like the case of running across the street. If she does it as a favor, I guess we can live with it. She's choosing, for whatever reasons, to do this dangerous thing as a help to you. If I give her a reasonable amount of money for that work, again, I think we can live with it ethically. But here's the time that the overpayment looks bad, right? I'm going to overpay her to do something very dangerous, and I might be tempting her into doing something which is really not a good idea for her. And so this is sort of the kind of case that we have in mind. So the question is, does this come up in research cases, right? Is the case of Kate with the heart condition shoveling, or Eddie Murphy running across the street in Bowfinger, are these cases ones where where a person is facing great risk and is being induced unduly to take that risk. Largen and Lynch are going to say that actually this should not apply, because the IRB is not supposed to approve studies ever that carry this kind of high probability of causing harm or extreme discomfort. Actually, Amy and Beth, who are two leaders in our regulatory world, and John, of course, you are all happy to weigh in. I'm going to keep on going like a freight train here to try to get through in close to my 30 minutes. I'm going to be over, as you can see. But I'd be interested in your thoughts at the end of this talk about this, or anybody else on the call, about, is that right? The IRB basically is not supposed to allow studies that are high risk of this sort, high probability of causing harm or extreme discomfort. Or another way to put it, and again, more specifically, I think this is right, they're supposed to judge whether the risks to the participants have been minimized, right? The design is such that the goals are being achieved and the minimal risks to participants. And if there are additional risks, that they're justified by the social value of the knowledge to be gained and benefits to participants that do not include payments. So now this is where, again, the payments are rearing their head. If you were an IRB considering a study that put people at great risk, we said, oh, don't worry about it, I'm going to pay them $5,000. That is not supposed to be the use of a payment. The risks cannot be justified based on that. They can be based on the very, very high value of the research, the fact the risks have been absolutely minimized, or benefit to the participants, like a person, I guess, going through a chemotherapy trial where the drug is their last chance. Again, this gets back to our idea of what we're paying people for when we pay them when they participate in research studies. Let's see where I'm going here. Okay, so the wage model is going to be okay in some cases, but again, with very high risks, the wage model is not going to apply. When we pay people in some jobs to take very high risks for very high pay, think of the test pilot. I guess we are not looking at that kind of situation for research subjects. But again, for researchers who are nervous about this topic, might be watching this or might be reading something, the idea is, unless there are those high risks, and there's a concern that we're actually getting people to act against their best interest, the worries about undue influence probably are not primary. So what are the dangers? There are still some dangers of allowing higher payments, right? First of all, if you were allowing researchers to overpay and to pay somebody $1,000 for participating in a phase 1 trial, there is the danger that the IRB will forget its obligation to not count that in considering risk. So what if regulators allowed trials to occur where the risks were not minimized, where there were no benefits to participants that were non-monetary, and the social value of the information was not high? But it's, oh, well, at least it's a lot of money. That makes it okay. That would be a danger. Let's assume that would not happen. There is a danger, of course, when you pay too much, you may get some problems in how people, in how you apply the exclusion and inclusion criteria. And the danger here is that if you're paying so much, then there is a danger people will conceal their personal history that would exclude them from the study, and especially if that's one that would put them at higher risk. So here's a imagine this case, again, it comes from Largen and Lynch's paper. It's a phase 1 trial where people with a history of previous malignancy are not eligible because the treatment or the study procedures would put them at high risk if they had a previous malignancy. If you're overpaying for participation in that study, someone with that history of previous malignancy, even told they should not participate, might choose to conceal that malignancy in order to participate. In this case, they are incurring a risk that the IRB did not approve, that would not be appropriate, but they're hiding it because of the high payment. So this is a big risk of higher payments. This is the risk that actually Lynch and Largen sort of admit to. There are two sides of it. There's a side about giving people risks that they should not have to incur. They should not be allowed into the study because they will be incurring those high risks. There's also a scientific issue that they might be giving into the study, again, concealing aspects that would make the study less valid for their participation. And these are the risks of higher payments that Lynch and Largen want to acknowledge. And if that's the reason for limiting the payment, then that's right. If you're a researcher, you're concerned about paying too much for these reasons, that's a good reason. The one I'm throwing cold water on is the idea that you're just afraid you're exploiting or unduly influencing in the case of people being truthful. Now, what's the danger of not allowing higher payments, right? If there is a danger of allowing higher payments, what's the danger of not allowing higher payments? And the answer there is very clear, and sadly, I think, very common. So here's exploitation. The danger is exploitation, again, a favorite philosophy word. Exploitation occurs when one party to a transaction insufficiently benefits or assumes an unfair share of burdens relative to other parties in a transaction, right? The classic case is the sweatshop, right? So you're paying people a penny to work 12 hours because they are desperate. You are not paying them a reasonable wage. That is not a fair payment. And so you're exploiting them. They're agreeing to it, but that doesn't make it okay. You're not paying them what you should be paying them. Now, I have friends in the philosophy world who think that actually even that should be considered. If it's a sweatshop, that's still fair because people have freely chosen to do it and they're still pursuing their own self-interest. It's a bad situation that they have to work for 12 hours for 1 penny, but it is not harming them. They are not worse off at the end of it. I'll leave those arguments again for another day. But if there is such a thing called exploitation, I believe there is, then underpaying people for their work below a reasonable pay is exploitation, and it's unethical. Within medical research, of course, we know about cases in international research where this has happened, where the research was actually located internationally in order to find people who are desperate and would be willing to take low risks. The general idea of exploitation is you really could have consensual exploitation. That's the second bullet point. Again, the sweatshop or other underpaid employment. So consent doesn't, the fact that somebody agreed doesn't make something, or even that they agree to their own free will, does not make something non-exploitative. So if you can see, I'm concerned about exploitation, and I'm concerned about the fact that when participants are asked to do things that may be burdensome or even risky, and they're not paid a fair rate, something that would seem fair to cover their participation, to reimburse them or at least compensate them for their work, maybe what you might consider a fair wage, then they're being exploited. There's that danger. They're being treated unfairly. And again, as a philosopher and as a thoughtful ethicist, I will say that, of course, the notion of exploitation is, even if you believe in it as I do, it is a squishy notion, right? What determines what's a fair rate? Especially what would a fair rate be in a research setting? And again, this is my libertarian philosopher friends. You know, they say, how do you, Peter Schwartz, and your like-minded, liberal-minded philosophers criticize a transaction where a person makes an informed choice, ends up better off, and you just think they were underpaid? They say, Peter, you're being your classic paternalist. Largen and Lynch think, yeah, sure, these are complicated, but the IRB has this concern to defend our participants, not just from unnecessary risks or undue influence, but to protect them from exploitation. So when the resources are there, for sure, to pay them appropriately. Lynch and Largen and people like me who want participants to be paid higher, we point also to things like, if you underpay, you have the risk of not recruiting sufficiently, and therefore the entire project becomes unethical because it's not achieving its research goals. You may actually only attract people with lower socioeconomic status. You may fail to attract people from a wider range of socioeconomic backgrounds, and there's a scientific benefit to that, and I would say an ethical benefit, a justice benefit to involving a wider range of people in research. If you overpay, you will get some of the poor, middle class, and upper class. If you really do stick to the lowest payment possible, you may get people who are only willing to do it for a lower wage. Okay, so I am at the end. We want to offer payment that fits the time and the burden involved. You probably can consider risks as well, but be careful adjusting payment for that in case you are getting into the realm of undue influence, where you're encouraging people to take high risks that were not minimized, perhaps, because you're paying them a lot. Avoid that overpayment, therefore, when you're concerned about undue influence. Avoid underpayment due to the danger of exploitation and the dangers of limited recruitment. And explain your rationale to the IRB and any regulators or involved researchers, or certainly on grant applications, as clearly as possible. The least controversial justifications are the ideas of reimbursement, appreciation, and paying the fair wage for burden and time. I should mention there's some topics here I did not cover. There's a question of how to, it's the same, that is the same truck that was here before, or at least it's a duplicate. There's the question of when to stop paying a participant who perhaps fails to complete a study or violates some other expectation of participants in a study, and those are written in, and that's another side of paying participants. Of course, when we determine payment amounts, there are all kinds of things you might take into account, like cost of living, wages. People argue that different parts of our country may have different payment amounts for the same research participation. There's a fascinating question. It's actually the question I asked Amy and Beth about last week, is the question of whether you can pay people different amounts based on their expertise. You know, if I'm interviewing doctors in my study, and I know I'll get no doctors to participate if I don't pay them $100 each for their hour of their interview, but I know I can get lay people for the same price for a very similar interview, then I have been told, and I think it's interesting, that we cannot pay them separate amounts. We should pay them the same amount because we're asking the same of them. And if we are paying even on the wage model, the fact that somebody has an MD is not itself a reason to be paid more just because you need them to participate. Amy and Beth both helped me think through also the question of what you're asking from them. If they're perhaps providing specialized knowledge, there could be a justification for paying more to a specialist, highly trained person. But again, these are the sort of things you have to think through in terms of your fairness. There are some strict rules about how you describe your payments to people on advertisements. You don't put them first, I believe. And so we always follow that on our rules, that we do not make it the #1 thing that is said. Although again, I think that's an interesting side of how we think about payment and research. There are other issues on paying children and their families when people less than the age majority participate in research. There are special issues there I'm not going to talk about today. And there are taxation responsibilities that are practical. I should say that there's part of the reason I'm thinking about those, and I've recently been reminded of those additional issues, is this CTSI recruitment optimization project that Brenda Hudson is leading. A lot of my friends are involved, and I'm involved in somewhat, and I'm eager to see what they provide. I hope that this talk can be of help to researchers who might have questions about these topics too, although I know I went very fast. Feel free to come to BSAP, the Bioethics Subject Advocacy Program, for a consultation or just conversation. We love thinking about these issues. I promise I won't lecture too much about exploitation. We'll just think it through. We have this webpage I showed you where you can request a consult, and you can also just email me or Ty Yogo, who's our program manager, or just the bsap@iu.edu. And now I blissfully, both for you and for me, get to stop talking and I get to hear what you think. So I will open, I'm going to stop the full share, do that. Good. And now I'm going to do participants. And really, with this number, we only have 36 people. You're really welcome to open your mic and ask a question. If you want to raise your hand and go in that order, I can see the participant list here. I'll pull that over to this screen. Please feel free. And thank you for being here. Thank you for your attention. Carol Robertson Plouch, you are unmuted. I would
yes, sure. I put a message in the chat, but I'll just vocalize it here, verbalize it here. So thinking about the wage model, I think it's a very, very interesting thing to think about, and probably could be a whole separate discussion in and of itself, because what is the reasonable wage then? Is it today's minimum wage? Is it the minimum wage post the current proposal, which doubles it? Or is it a professional wage, or is it someplace in between? So, you know, is it $8 an hour? Is it $15 an hour? Is it $100 an hour? Is it $300 an hour? You know,
you know how they said
how do we even determine that?
I know it's crazy, right? So let me tell you what I learned as I came up the ranks as a professor now is that they actually set wages at IU by looking at other universities. Right? They say like, okay, how much do you pay a doc here? How much do you pay a new surgeon here? Well, look at what they're paying in Cleveland and what they're paying at IU Health. And so it is kind of a funny game, right? How much is fair is partly based on just what other people do. And you didn't have a reason for paying them this amount, and now they don't, but you're still, you're benchmarking your amount by their amount. So there are some funny numbers that seem like they're standard numbers in research participation. And I go by those numbers when I'm running studies, like $30 for an hour, generally for an interview with a patient, or $50 if I can get away with it. And anyway, in further answer to your question, I now call on Amy Waltz and Beth Johnson to answer your question.
Hi, this is Beth. I would say for the last several years, we've been seeing about $15 usually, for much longer than it's been in the political discussion realm. That's been pretty standard.
15 per hour.
Yep.
And how about more than that? What if someone wants to pay 30 an hour? Is that just
sure.
Yeah, that's okay too. But at least 15.
Yeah, I would say.
Excellent. Thank you, Beth. You're brave and helpful. Thank you for being here. I said I wouldn't need you, but I did. Yeah, no, so that's interesting. So would the wage model would be by the hour. Lucy has her hand up. Lucy?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this with kids too, and parents. Do we compensate kids and reimburse parents? Or what do you think about that?
So this is interesting. I said I was not gonna talk about kids. In fact, what we'll do is we'll put Mary Ott on the stand to answer either now or in a future talk. But I know that the recruitment optimization program has been thinking about this and what's the best method for paying for pediatric participation. Because we generally don't pay 5-year-olds, big money or even small money. We give it, they're below the age of majority. Actually, Lucy, I know you practice in the pediatric realm. So what do you do? Is it a matter of paying the family?
It is. So what we tend to do is we pay the participant. So we pay 5-year-olds, we pay 2-year-olds. And then it's just a matter of reporting is a little bit different. But we usually pay the participant. If the participant is the whole family, then what we tend to do is go ahead and give the payment to whoever the adult is at the visit, and then how they want to divvy it up as a family is up to them. And I usually, at least for me, communicate to everyone at the same time what that plan is for me. But just trying to, there's no set rules or set guidelines, I think, for us too. It's just what each individual group does.
Outstanding. That sounds very reasonable what you're saying. And actually, if anybody else wants to comment on that or criticize it, feel free. But that sounds like you have a good approach. It is complicated when you're paying a child for anything, like paying him for cleaning his room. Parents pay children. I pay my children. They did very good work last weekend, very impressively heavy work, actually. And I pay them a fair wage. I think I overpaid them. They think I underpaid them, which means it must have been the right amount. Okay, John, you've come off mute. I've got to let you go.
So this has been very interesting. Thank you, Peter, and everyone else who's made comments or raised questions. So, sometimes when you're in the process of conducting research, it's fairly easy to get the first, say, 60% of your subjects. But then as it gets later and later in the project, it gets harder to find the remaining subjects that you might want to obtain. What are people's thoughts about, almost a market-driven reimbursement process in which at a certain point, in order to finish off your successful recruitment, you feel like you need to up the amount that you're giving them, which means now you're giving people more than you gave 3 months ago?
This is the true wage model, right? Why are wages going up now? We have a shortage of lifeguards. So the lifeguard wage has gone up in my local place. So thoughts on this? That does seem like the wage model. I see Amy has come on camera. Amy.
So I think we're kind of talking about this when you asked us this question earlier this week, Peter. And I think the issue really is the comparison of the two groups, because as you mentioned, if you put in 2 different protocols and said, I'm going to pay them $30, and in the second protocol, I'm going to pay them $50, an IRB would look at those and it would be unlikely that they would say that that was coercive. I think it's only when the comparison happens that IRBs start to get a little bit uneasy with that. And I would say that, uneasy is not just because you're uneasy or just because it feels a little weird doesn't mean that it goes against the regulations or that it actually is coercive. So it's an interesting question, but if I were an IRB member, I think I would support that.
Yeah. I mean, what's fascinating is I really understand what you and Beth said, Amy, about how, and this maybe applies to what John's saying, is how, if I'm asking different things of them, I'm asking for lay experience, which is commonly shared across society, versus I'm asking for doctor experience, which is not commonly shared, is much more rare and relies on specialized training, then I can justify paying them more.
No, but that was not my question. My question,
Exactly.
the subjects are no different from one another.
Right.
But in order to successfully recruit, you have to raise the ante, if you will.
Right. Either late in the study, the way you said, John, or because my study needs MDs and providers, and I'm just doing it because I need to get them, and I can't get them if I don't pay them enough. And that's basically the wage model, right? I've got a problem. I've got high paid specialists for research purposes that are reasonable. I need them to talk to me, and I cannot get them to talk to me if I only pay them 30. So I'm going to pay them 100, even though I'm going to pay the lay people 30 for the same interview, but I can get lay people for 30. I can't get doctors for less than 100. I think you might make an argument, and poor old Amy and Beth have to actually be the deciders, but I would support the argument that you can pay them different amounts based on this wage model. But John, do you not like that answer? Or do
No,
you
I think there's a practicality that makes it almost necessary to answer that way.
Excellent.
I would, it seems to me that if you were going to do that, you would have to kind of go back and retroactively pay the rest of the folks the same wage. And there's a couple things that just come to my mind about it. One is, if we started to do that regularly, all your trials, I can assure you, are going to have a hard time enrolling until the prices go way up. And so I think it'd be better to again, look at the trial as a whole, try to come up with what's going to be the right thing to do, and then stick with it. And then if you do have to make a change because it's not working, to be fair in terms of how you make that change would be, I guess, the advice I would think about.
I'm going to introduce Matt. Matt's the lead of the bioethics at Lilly Corporation. Thank you, Matt, for being here. Thank you for that thought. Right. So people, will they hold back? It's kind of like the worry I think we have here about paying for vaccination. I think the governor said that. He said, well, we're afraid of paying because people will wait to get vaccinated until they see the price go up, or they go to see the lottery gets richer. Of course, Matt, that could be a practical concern, but not an ethical one, right? It could basically, in the end, undermine your ability to recruit if the price of participation that people are expecting goes up, and they're going to hold back and see if later in the study they can get more dollars. That's of course the problem with paying people more ever, right? If we start paying lifeguards more this year because we have a shortage, then gosh darn it, JCC membership is going to go up because they're paying people more.
I think the fairness is the ethical issue, though, right? If you're asking for the same stuff from the same people, you should pay the same.
No, if I hire lifeguards, because I only have 7 lifeguards, I need 9. If I pay the last 2 lifeguards I hire a higher fee, the first 7 are going to quit unless I go back and raise their fee too. So actually, again, it does seem to fit here a bit on that wage model. We're not asking people, I assume, in these studies to do something dangerous, like run across a road. It's been the sort of thing the IRB approves as minimizing risks, not being ridiculously high risks. And in that case, I think actually going to the wage model and thinking of the costs and benefits of paying higher wages is not wrong. I think it's a useful way to think about things. And I see Lucy's come off. Oh, wait, a few people have come off. Oh, no, she's come on camera. Please just raise your hand if you want to talk. I still have my participant thing open. I was going to say there was Zainab Salih came on the chat to say that she was giving, they did want to increase an incentive because they were not recruiting enough, and they increased. And they were worried about telling patients about it at the beginning. They would be coercive. But again, Zainab, my whole talk so far is to say, telling people what you are going to pay them is not, and it being a good fee that people will actually respond to and choose to participate because you are paying them that amount, is not coercion. I don't think that should ever make you think of coercion. I think of overpayment as being nice and having certain dangers, but nothing like coercion dangers, unless there's some other things about the study you want to tell me, which is that you're exposing them to risk the IRB should never have approved, or something like that. And so Zainab, I'm just, part of my point of this talk of picking on you for this great question is that I want to highlight that I want people to walk away from this being more suspicious of this question. A lot of researchers have of, if I pay more, it will be coercive. I know I went fast at that part of the talk because I just can't do everything in an hour, but I hope you think about that. Zainab, go ahead.
Yeah. So can you hear me, Peter?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So my question was, yes, the research assistant is telling the participants they're going to be getting a gift card, but she told me she wouldn't tell the amount. I said, why not? Because this is the reason we raised this incentive from $25 to $100. I mean, why don't you? So she was hesitant. She said this would be coercion. So I wonder if telling the amount is okay or not.
Well, this is great, Zainab, because I'm thinking it should be fine to say it right up front. It's not, again, assuming there's nothing else about this that we should be concerned about. But now I'm going back to Amy and Beth again, because I do believe the rules still are that when you advertise a study, you cannot put the dollars in big numbers, in big text, and then put the rest of the study participation in small text. And John, of course, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting, I didn't bother you before the talk. So Amy and Beth are my people I'm picking on, but John, you're in too. I see you've come off mute. That I thought you were not allowed to put that on advertisements at the very top, kind of like your RA there, Zainab, who said, I'm not going to say it first. I'll say it, but I won't say it first. John, Amy, Beth.
I'll let Amy and Beth answer.
Okay, thanks, John.
Hi, yeah, I agree. You don't want to start with, hey, get paid for participating in this research study, but you can say it as your second sentence, your third sentence. That's fine. They can say it as part of that initial recruitment, unless the IRB has expressly, approved something else as the recruitment plan.
But I actually came off mute because I wanted to ask a question. When the IRB approved you increasing the incentive, to go back to the comment that Matthews raised, did they make you go back and compensate already participating subjects more, or they just did it as a market process, if you will?
Right. We did this actually twice. That's what first time we increased it was a few years ago. And this is the second time. They didn't ask us to go back and recompensate, because this would be very cumbersome. And to me, I don't think it makes a big difference in the end. If the participant wants to participate in my kind of research, they would or not, But for some people, it might be. For some people, it might be a reason. But they didn't ask us to go back and pay the rest more.
I think that highlights the limitations of IRB review. IRB review is based in ethics, but we are not charged with covering everything that might be ethical. We still have regulations that tell us which portions of the study we should be reviewing and what our standards are. And so I think that would go a little bit beyond what our charge is in the common rule, personally.
Yeah, we are not an ethics review.
Right. Well, wait, so I want to go to Howard. Howard, you have your hand up, and you asked a question in chat, which I didn't get to yet. Please go ahead and ask that question or another if you'd like.
No, I'm going to skip the one in chat because I think you addressed it. Whether or not you pay someone a lot of money, you can't ask them to do something that's ridiculously dangerous. No, I wanted to push back briefly on Matthew's comment about retroactive payment using your example. If you change the payment from a lifeguard from $8 to $10, clearly the other people you're recruiting at the same time ought to get paid that. You don't go back the last 50 years and pay everyone who used to be a lifeguard. That makes no sense.
Well, what's great, Howard, it's great. This is a deep philosophical question. When does somebody's participation in the study end? Is it that the study is still ongoing, so they're like the lifeguards you already have, in that they've done their participation, but they're still sort of part of the same study? Or has their participation ended, kind of like your example of going back to the lifeguards from last year? Matt, do you have a thought on this?
Well, let me chime in a quick answer first on that, because I think it ends when their physical or intellectual participation ends. I don't keep paying technicians when they leave just because the grant goes on.
Excellent response, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, well, so first of all, before I went back to graduate school, I used to lifeguard. Now, I would love to get recompensated for the 50 years since I did for the difference in wages now. Yeah, I think I guess it's not black and white, but I do think you could run into problems if and of course, participants aren't supposed to talk, but I think if I was currently in a study and I found out that somebody else who was in it was getting more than me, I would maybe have some questions about that. I think you have a good point about once you've completed the study, maybe it's done. So that's the thing why it raises questions of fairness. I do think, though, this is also just another thing. Before I was too quick to change the pricing, I would really want to dig in to understand what are the barriers to enrollment. Maybe there is something in the inclusion exclusion. Maybe there are parts of the study that are more burdensome than what you had anticipated. And it could be that maybe you need to pay more for that, but it could be maybe you can simplify your study or make other changes that might make more sense than just increasing the payment rate. So
that is a great comment. I think it brings the talk actually full circle. I'm going to take advantage of that. If there's a burning question, I'll entertain it. But Matt, as you know, and as many of the researchers know, we are in a new age of research participation, where the participant is considered differently. We used to say, you know, they're a subject, right? We used to say. Now we say participant. And actually, the group I am funded by recently is Corey, and they call them partners. Right? They want to think of them as being partners, almost going back to that Hans Joe Jonas conception of sharing a goal, and therefore your contributions being the scientist, their contribution is participating, and you're working together towards a common goal. And so payment always has been sort of an awkward part of that. And I would say this, like so you're saying, Matt, if you think about the other benefits of participation, being included, being communicated with, hearing about results that affect you, or perhaps results that affect society, having that open and honest exchange and communication, I think is the goal for research ethics now, and probably the picture for the future. And so I agree that talking about money, you know, filthy lucre, as we say in Latin, you know, is a little off-putting, because it almost takes us away from that. I would say, however, I want to actually make this point, that it's actually making sure we pay people as well as we can without getting distracted by I believe, a red herring of coercion or of undue influence in most cases, is actually a way of showing that partnership again. We're not just trying to get the biggest bang for our littlest buck, right? Unless we really have to. And I've done studies that were pilot studies run on shoestring, where I was paying people out of my own pocket, really. I shouldn't say that. Is that against the rules? And that was way back when, not currently. But, you know, I was paying, you know, it was really, there was no grant. Now there's a grant. And of course you have to budget a grant responsibly, and your funder will of course watch that, but actually paying well as you can is, I think, part of our respect issues. It's not to replace treating your participants as partners, but it's a way to respect them as partners as well as you can. Last questions. I guess it is 1 o'clock. Holy cow, we're on time and under budget. Under budget. Getting back to the payment issue. I'm gonna go ahead and stop. Please feel free to email us. You have the emails that we put up on the things. You now know how to get to us by the web. We'd love to talk more about this. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in a month for our next Treats Talk.